Good morning to the next edition of the Cambridge House Conferences. This morning, we'll be introducing Thom Calandra. He started Ticker Tracks in Canada and is co-founder of CBS MarketWatch and FT MarketWatch. He conducts on-site visits and writes about natural resource companies in the Americas and overseas. You can find out more about Thom and his work at Torrey Hills Capital by going to babybulls.com. This morning, Thom will be giving us, quote, 2-minute takes on mining company favorites in Colombia, Nevada, Portugal, and Quebec. Please welcome Mr. Thom Calandra.
Woohoo! Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for letting me use this thing. You know, it's the only thing that keeps me awake this point in the morning. I was out with Joe Martin last night. We were celebrating the birthday party of a friend of ours, Glenn Mullen from Golden Valley Mines. And I said, Glenn, Joe, I love it when you schedule me so early in the morning as the keynote speaker, because, you know, there have been like at least 12 times where you scheduled me at 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Think of how long you have to stay sober, right? I mean, like for 14 or 16 hours you have to stay sober to speak at 4 or 5 in the afternoon. You know, Mick Jagger, and this is true, always has a little glass of sherry, you know, before he goes on, but he goes on at night. I mean, I can't have a glass of sherry before I go on at 8:30 in the morning, so I had a Bloody Mary instead. And I'm Thom Calandra, and there's my, I don't really know. Oh, there it is. Okay, I have a great PowerPoint, but before I go into that, I just wanted to talk about a few things and really tell you that I was hoping to do a more X-rated or NC-17 obscene kind of performance today because I'm so pissed off at what's been happening in the markets. And you see the reason I wear this tie, it's one of these vintage Bill Graham Grateful Dead psychedelic ties because, you know, we're from San Francisco, even though I grew up in New York, but I used to be a Grateful Dead head, and it's quite a tie. It's there just to remind me that when I look at my portfolio, I'm not hallucinating. I am down 35% in the last 2 years, you know, or 40% in the past 2 years. March is going to be 2 years, by the way. 2 years when all this terrible, terrible stuff started happening to the resource equities. And I would love to know, is there someone out there, anyone, just in this small group of, thank you for showing up at 8:30 in the morning, the small group of people who can say that they're not down. Yeah, really, so what are you buying?
I bought in last May.
Oh, you bought in last May. Well, May, you know, as you know, very good. He said he bought in last May. May was the technical bottom that's still holding in the so-called GDXJ, and I'm still a believer that we've bottomed. But you know, my crowd, and especially the 32 or so equities that I own, are what we call the penny dreadfuls, right? The penny dreadfuls are companies that have market caps of $30 million or less. And I can say that they've been hit hardest. They come back the slowest, and they hopefully will have a big bang for the buck. Now, when I give these presentations, I generally don't talk about what's on the PowerPoint thing. So it's kind of like an added attraction. And I'm always very willing to be interactive. I can tell you right now, just to be current, that I had a special focus for this one on Colombia. And what happens Friday night, but 5 people get kidnapped in Colombia, in Bolivar Sur, which is a departamento, right, that's not exactly the safest place. And these 5 people, I don't know if you've heard about this, this is true actually, it's not one of my stupid jokes. They're technical staff and geologists. One is a Canadian, 2 Colombians and 2 Peruvians from a company called Breval, which is a company that Sean Rusin from Osisco and some of his people started with their money. And in fact, one of the companies I'm close to, Belhaven, actually vended these properties into a part of their properties into this company. When I go to Colombia 5 or 6 times a year, and in fact I lived there when I was a very, very young person teaching English. And this area was a rough area, but the last time I was there especially, which was in December, I got so many questions from people about, is it safe, is it safe, is it safe? And you know, it's like the safest place in the world. I can't tell you how many times I've lost my passport, truth, phone, or wallet, and the next day, or later that evening, it shows up at my hotel, untouched. But there are political problems. And I think what we're starting to see is the investing world is seeing that every time they think a jurisdiction is fantastic, Colombia, longest standing free democracy in Latin America, going on 56 years, like Ghana in West Africa. One of the 5 or 6 nations whose currency is performing best against the US dollar in the last 6 years, because of its commodities. Every time we think we have a jurisdiction that looks great, whose administration is, pro-resources, doesn't want to nationalize equities, something happens. Now, if I'm correct, because I just saw this, and I actually talked to some of the people involved, details are leaking out slowly. Breval, which only went public, I think in October, was down 20% or something. I assume it was down 20% on the news. I like to tell a little story about one of the great problems that we've been facing in this industry as investors in the past 2 years especially, and certainly for a long time. I mean, I go way back. I'm practically prehistoric. I'm 56 years old, and I've met practically everybody there is to meet in this business because I've been a journalist since 1981. I mean, I remember interviewing Doug Casey when I was working for USA Today, when he wrote his first big book, Crisis Investing, in the 80s. I remember meeting Robert Friedland for the first time in 1991, at the Stanford Court in San Francisco when I was a newspaper reporter for the San Francisco Examiner and Chronicle. And Robert was, this was before it was very in vogue to say things like this. And he would say, he'd say, all the gold in the biosphere could sit in this room, that kind of stuff. And everyone would go, whoa. And the next day there'd be a headline to say. So, I have, but it's only been in the past 8 or 9 years since we sold MarketWatch to Dow Jones for $520 million that I've really made it my I don't know how to say it, my avocation to follow resource equities. And we had 3 or 4 good years there, but I can tell you the last 2 years have been terrible. And one of the reasons is because there's way too many freaking companies. Come on. Everybody always uses this term, there are 3,000 publicly held companies or 5,000. But if you look at the entire biosphere, there are at least 10,000 publicly traded resource companies in the world. And 98% of them right now are underwater. They're right now, especially in the past 2 years when it started in March of 2011, there are maybe 2% of these companies that have withstood this terrible, terrible torture that's been happening to equities. So how do you screen these companies? How do we filter these companies? We like to joke. I was at a party last night, a Forbes West party, and we like to joke that the people that we know, that we like, whose stocks are falling, but we still like them as people, and they run these companies, is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. I mean, sure, I can say 90% of the companies that I own have equities that are that continue to decline, even now after this May bottom. But some of these people I like, and some of them even tell the truth, and not many of them, but there are people who tell the truth, are likable. Now, finding the people who tell the truth, are likable, and whose stocks are going up, that's the key. And I can tell you from what I do, and I restarted the Calandra report in August of this year, right? It used to be very well known in 10, 12 years ago at MarketWatch. It was a huge product. And then I had my hand slapped by the SEC, mostly because, except for one person, I made everybody a lot of money. But that was a good experience for me because it got me to speak a little slower, Got me to speak a little slower, Anyway, I like to say that one way we can screen companies is by saying, why don't we just invest in any company that's run by a guy named Bob? That's it. I mean, we'll probably find 5,000 companies, or at least 100 companies. Now, finding the 100 companies that are run by guys named Bob that aren't liars and that have stocks going up and that have some integrity and that once in a while buy you a drink, might be a way to proceed, because right now it makes as much sense as anything else that anybody else in this market's doing. And if any of these newsletter writers or experts tell you something different, they're probably doing it because they want a subscription. Now, I like to say, and in fact, once again, I saw him last night, and he's a good friend. The only reason there are people in this room is because Frank Holmes comes on after I do, and so they want a good seat for Frank. And Frank tells this story, but he tells it in a much more sophisticated way, with charts, and he's very much into money flows and stuff like that. And of course, he has about 2,400 people working for him in Austin, Texas, so he can get all these data. I have my 13-year-old daughter working for me. Too many Bobs in the business. I know them all. They all run gold companies. There are some of them right there. And by the way, all of the art in this, except for one or two exceptions, is my art, as in my photos, not counting SpongeBob. Robert Redford actually lives in our county where we live in California. And by the way, that was kind of a downer that the Canucks lost. And now they have to play a second game right after the first game. By the way, I would have thought here in Vancouver they would have lit the Olympic flame for the fact that the NHL season started yesterday, didn't it? And I went over and I saw the flame was dead. What's going on there? What is it with this stuff? I heard some of these teams actually gave away free tickets, like the Sharks in San Jose, where I'm from. I also heard that the San Jose Sharks have the biggest, hottest selling, what do you call it, jersey. And because of its colors appeal to women, teal, and some other colors, and it was good to hear that. Anyway, some of the Bobs there. There are very many Bobs. Why choose any other company? We have Porphyry Bobs, Billy Bobs, and thin-skinned Bobs. I can tell you off the record that some of those thin-skinned Bobs do make people money. You just have to make sure they're telling the truth. So, as you know, I do have my truth serum rule, and that is, this is Colombia, by the way, recently, Belhaven, I believe. I give truth serum to guys named Bob. I know you're not going to believe that, but I do. And I'm not, it's not like throwing acid in somebody's face at the Bolshoi Ballet, which just happened 2 nights ago. But I try to make it a pleasant experience. As you know, truth serum can be hallucinogenic. And, there's nothing wrong with hallucinogenics as long as you stay organic. And I thought, well, let's see what some of these Bobs say, right? Now, of course, the best Bob that I know, the one that's made me the most money, and the one that's best known is Robert Friedland. I've traveled around with Robert, and I'm an owner of shares of Ivan Platts, which was the largest Canadian IPO in like 10 years. This was in October, and I'm down on my knees praying that I can't stay, I'm not allowed to sell until April, but I'm praying that it stays, the stock price stays where it is until April. So finally I'll have a winner after 12 years, right? But I figured, what if I gave truth serum to Robert and asked him questions about Kamoa or the Platte Reef in South Africa and stuff like this, and so I did, on one of his planes, hurtling through the night, and and he said, he looked at me, and it takes about 5 seconds. He says, the public doesn't want the fucking truth. They want to make money. Okay, so that was his response. I actually gave truth serum to a number of other Bobs. Bob Carrington from Colombian Mines. I gave truth serum to Bob Moriarty, who happens to be a writer, but is connected to companies in Australia. I gave truth serum, and this was the best answer of all, to Bob Allen, a good friend of mine, and a guy who runs companies, vends properties into companies in Colombia, Grupo de Boulet. Bob is a legend. I mean, he was there in Colombia earlier than I was, and he's still alive, and I love him. And he's a good old boy from Arkansas who spends half his time in Medellin. And if you've ever met Bob, and I'm sure we'll find another picture of him here, he looks like a cowboy, and he talks like one, but everyone loves him down there, and he's good in Spanish. And I gave him the truth serum, and and he looked at me. By the way, some of his properties have created some of the best performing companies in Colombia right now still, like Continental Gold, one of the 2% of companies that are outperforming, or Sol Vista Gold, right? And And I actually told Bob, because he was a friend, that I was going to do this. And he says, well, Pilgrim, why don't you all just squirt a little more of that right here in my gin and tonic? And that was a good question. That was he was acknowledging that he was... This is actually a property, I believe, in Turkey. Yet again, and I hope I'm right on that one, because I see like 30 to 40 of these companies a year. Pilot Gold is yet another one of the companies, PLG in Canada, that's outperforming, right? Its stock continues to go higher, right? Capital is stepping down. There he is, Bob Allen on your right. No, that's Bob Carrington. Oh, I'm so confused. Bob Carrington on your right from Columbian Mines, and Bob Allen on your left. I actually introduced them to one another after they hadn't seen each other for 9 years. This was when we were in Medellin. And my favorite quote from Bob Carrington from Columbian Mines, which I think, by the way, is the cheapest thing you're going to find in Colombia right now, aside from one other company, CMJ. My favorite moment with Bob and his wife Gloria, where he had picked me up. A guy had flew me in a plane from California to Nevada. He's from Reno, but he's also spent half of his life in Colombia developing companies. And we get in the pickup truck, and he's driving, and we're going out there to Battle Mountain to see this property, right outside Battle Mountain. And there's some, the geologist in the back, whom I'm sitting next to, we're bumping around on this road, and he says, Bob, are those guns underneath the seat? And Bob, who almost certainly voted for Mitt Romney, said, well, yeah. And the geologist said, well, are they loaded? And Bob looked in the mirror and said, well, why'd I carry a gun if it weren't loaded? Anyway, that's Bob Carrington. By the way, we have a great offer now at Torrey Hills, which is one of the two things that I do full-time. I write and go to see things, and I do a little IR on the side for a bunch of people that have been in the IR business forever at Torrey Hills. And the deal is that if we can't move your stock 20% in 6 months, we will give you, in the first 6 months of your contract, we will supply you with free ammunition for any of your weapons, not including WMDs and Bushmaster 234s. Also, I am required to say that there are certain parts of North America that are exempt. For example, if you live along the border of Mexico and Canada, we cannot make good on this, and there are other restrictions, including certain parts of Thunder Bay, Ontario. Right, but we stand behind our word. Not all companies are run by guys named Bob. Some of them are run by women who have a great social agenda, and that is what's happening in Colombia with Gran Colombia Gold. That's a photo that I took, and I know some of my friends from Gran Colombia are here, and I think that Gran Colombia used to be Maduro and goes back, but essentially it operates two of the largest, most, I don't know how to say problematic, but producing properties in Colombia. El Marmato, which El Marmato is this huge kind of Blade Runner-like mess of a mountain that has illegal miners all over it and toxics. And they've done more. They've done more in 2 years to clean this situation up than has happened in the last 300 years that illegals have mined El Marmato. The same in Segovia, where this picture was taken. This area of Segovia, which is also very prolific, thin veins, and quite a producer. I am willing to take a bet on companies with people whose CEOs are not named Bob. I have to tell you that lately, I've made it a point, because nothing else is working, to whittle down my criteria. In addition to people named Bob, I have to see that there's some kind of social component, a real social component. You know, when I started going to South Africa in 2001, 2002, and you'd sit in on a presentation, and remember, everybody was down there in South Africa. Oh, by the way, that's somewhat, we were at the Munich Gold Show, and this guy, he's actually a Vancouver promoter, actually came out of the meeting during the break and said, oh my God, I finally found a CEO who's telling the truth. And he was celebrating. So it was good that he found somebody who was telling the truth. My point about the social component is that in South Africa, 10 years ago, that would be an aside, right? You'd get that in the last 2 minutes of the presentation, if that. And then all of a sudden, about 4 years ago, I'd start going to some of these things with the Witwatersrand, for example, Platinum Group Metals, Ivan Platts, Harmony, many of the companies there. And I swear, you'd meet, and it could be a small presentation, or it could be a whole room full of analysts and reporters. They would start with a psalm from the Bible, and then they would go into 10 minutes of the social component, because that's how important it's become in South Africa. When I went to the but it's hard to distinguish who's really doing stuff on the social end and who isn't. When I went to the final Ivan Platts presentation in San Francisco in October, before it went public on that Monday, somebody asked the CEO, might have been me, well, they're in 2 jurisdictions, the DRC, or the Congo, and South Africa. And they said, well, aren't you afraid of the DRC? And the answer is no. We're more afraid of South Africa than we are of the Congo. I mean, in the Congo, read the prospectus, they took the time and had the foresight to pay some guy from Israel like a lot of money. We're talking tens of millions of dollars or more to set it up so everybody feels good about the project, feels good as in, I hope they're not recording me as in, you know. So everything's cool in the DRC, it's the South Africa that's not. This is Cambodia, and I'm very close to a company called Angkor Gold, run by Mike Weeks, who's in this room as well. And I don't know if I can go backwards on this thing, can I? But anyway, Angkor Gold is yet another one of those companies that has started to outperform again. And we're starting to see this in all these penny dreadfuls. This gradual, okay, we've hit the lows, we're gonna go higher. But it's probably, if I had to pick one company or 2 companies in the world that are actually very active on the social component that I can verify and that I'm willing to bet my own portfolio on, it would be Angkor Gold, because of what they've done with medical supplies and hospital supplies and schools and latrines, and Gran Colombia Gold in Colombia. And because I figure at this point, you know, I've lost so many millions, and I'm being literal here. Thank God my wife is still asleep, you know, upstairs, because when I tell this story, she knows I'm telling the truth. I've lost so many millions of the millions of dollars that we made when we sold MarketWatch on the resource equities just in the past 2 years that I might as well feel like I'm getting some extra bang for my buck on the social component. I don't know, I'm going to skip this slide. You know why? Because you're not going to believe that one. It's sort of a marketing device. And why companies change names, for example. I just saw, by the way, a company I have great respect for, Golden Predator, just entered into a name change kind of thing, which is very interesting. And I like those guys up in the Yukon, Bill Sheriff. But they want to get royalty in one of the names of the new companies. These are some of the companies, if you want to take some notes, I put some tickers up there because I know you didn't just come here to hear me tell stupid jokes. By the way, if this were a smaller space, I'd have a lot more people feeling comfortable about laughing. But I do know that it's kind of early in the day. And I am getting kind of a grunting, conceding little, you know, smiles and stuff like that. But it's okay to laugh, you know, at this early in the morning. I mean, right after this, I'm going to go have a Bloody Mary. And, you know, oh, no, wait, I have to be on a panel at 9:30. Can you believe that? So I better wait until 10 a.m. Solvista Gold, Colt Resources in Portugal, Gran Colombia Gold, Pilot Gold, Colombian Mines. Those are the ones that, for the most part, are either outperforming, or I am willing to bet my reputation that these 5 have, and in fact, they're all much higher than when we started coverage of them in August, will perform for us. That's actually TV Tower and Pilot at Pilot in Turkey. A wonderful country, a wonderful jurisdiction, and hopefully we won't have some terrible headlines coming out of Turkey. Every time I settle on a jurisdiction, something terrible happens. That's once again Maria Consuelo Araujo at Segovia for Gran Colombia Mines. Once again, a fantastic property. These are some of the more speculative ones that I'm involved with. I don't get paid by these companies. 1 or 2 of them maybe clients of Torrey Hills, but that's okay. Like I said, if the stock doesn't go higher by 20 or 30%, they get free ammunition for 6 months. Once again, disclaimer, no WMDs or Bushmaster 234s. Colombian mines, probably the cheapest thing right now in Colombia in terms of its vast property portfolio. They just came out with a property I didn't even know they had called Mercedes. I said, Bob, I didn't even know you owned a Mercedes. They have New Legacy Gold here in Nevada. They have a company called, a project called Red Hill. They just came out with some great numbers. We have a couple things happening on that front, and I know that we have people here from New Legacy. We also have people in this room from Colt. Seafield Resources, once again, a very cheap but highly speculative company on the other side of El Marmato in Colombia. I wish I could go into details about some of these, but like I'm so addicted to this sector, and I love these companies, and I bet on them with my life. I very rarely do private placements because my clients, as in my subscribers, who now pay $65 a year, I can't get those private placements. Once in a great while, I think I've done 3 private placements in the last 8 years. Even Ivanplatz 12 years ago wasn't a private placement. I had to buy the shares from other people. Others there, of course, Extra Gold in Ghana. And my friend Jimmy Longshore, who runs that company, is there in Ghana now. Golden Valley Mines in Quebec. I started this presentation by telling you a little bit about partying last night with Glenn Mullen, who is a big Montreal Canadiens fan and has this prospect generator there in Quebec in the Abitibi. I can't even read some of this. Oh, Prishimco in Panama. I just went to their project 2 months ago. Fantastic. And by the way, I said to the CEO, Alain Bureau, he's another Quebecois. I'm trying to improve my French because our children and my wife are fluent in French and went to French schools for most of their careers, thus further bankrupting me. I said, Alain, this was a property actually that Belhaven had sold to Prishimco many years ago, and it's probably a year or a year and a half away from production. I said, Alain, just tell me straight out, because it looks fantastic. Activity, the mill looks like it's on schedule, the drilling is on schedule, they have their targets lined up. Is there any way you're going to stop this up and it's not going to be producing in 18 months? Because please, tell me now. Just tell me now. He said, no, even we can't screw this one up. And so I was very happy to hear that. And Prishimco's been outperforming. When I started following that one 3 months ago, it was at 50 cents, 48, 50 cents. Now it's at 65 cents. And I very rarely buy near-term producers, by the way. I'm much more, except for Gran Colombia Gold and 1 or 2 others, I'm way farther out on the scale. And then, of course, on the speculative scale, we still have Encore Gold. The social component, as I said, for me is very important. I want to leave a couple minutes for questions. That's all Encore Gold. Once again, these pieces of art, shot by yours truly, me. Now, but I do want to make one quick point before you ask a couple questions, which is, okay, we've gone into the criteria, screening, companies only run by guys named Bob. But what happens if you find a company that's run by a gal who's telling the truth, or somebody with the name Skylar Spiller? Now, if you find a gold company run by a guy, a bruiser named Skylar Spiller, who actually plays hockey in Quebec and has a gold company and tells the truth, well, we probably need to invest in that company. I'm going to take some questions because I can see this is not a great laughing crowd, and most of you here for my friend Frank Holmes. Thank you for clapping. Any questions at all? Because you can really ding me. Yes?
What's your target on Gran Colombia?
Well, I think on Gran Colombia, what's my target? Look, it's a 38-cent stock. They overpromised a year ago. Now they're starting to deliver on the promise of way cheaper expenses on their production. They're the only company to have both gold and silver denominated notes. 38-cent stock. I think they're going to do a massive transaction that's going to transform Colombia at El Marmato. I'm not an insider. Sometime this year. And I think the stock is going to go higher than $2.50. Great way to play that one is the warrants, right? They have these warrants that went as high as 28 cents. Now they sell at 4 cents. That's Gran Colombia on the main Toronto board. There have to be, I have 22 seconds. You know, there's a station in New York that says, give us 22 minutes, we'll give you the world. Yeah.
What's your target on Prishimco?
What's my target for Pershimco? Oh, I think that if they continue to fulfill their promises and get into real production of gold and then later copper at their project in Panama, whose name I'm going to remember here because I was just there, I think it should be a $2 stock. Right now, it's been doing well, 65-cent stock. One last quick question. Yes? Ancor. Well, Ancor is a fascinating company. They're a prospect generator. They just did 2 great deals, one with an India company, one with a China company. And the stock has moved up from 28 cents to 38 cents. I own it at 45 cents. You know, I think fair value for that one because there will be no dilution on that one in the next 2 years. I'm promised that. I think fair value on that's $1. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you showing up.